I have released numerous display calibration videos, and most of those videos so far has been focused on device with built-in displays such as the one inside your laptop, an iMac, or an all-in-one desktop PC. This video is going to be a little different where I'm going to focus on an external display, specifically one that's not capable of hardware calibration. For this video, I'm going to be using the X-Rite i1 Display Pro Plus along with their Pro software, i1Profiler, to run a calibration on this display. I'm ArtIsRight, and this is ArtIsRight. Before we start, please subscribe if you're new and hit on the notification bell so you'll be updated every time I upload cool new guides like this. For this guide, I'm going to be using BenQ PD3220U. This is their 32-inch 4K display and is part of the Pro Designer series. This display is not capable of hardware calibration, which is specifically the reason why I'm using this display to do this guide. First of all, let me briefly talk about software versus hardware calibrated display. In a hardware calibrated display, there's a computer in a chip, but on that chip, on a hardware calibrated display, there is a lookup table, or a LUT for that matter. And when you run a calibration using the display manufacturer's software, what you're going to do is access that LUT directly, adjust that LUT, and all the color adjustment is done at the panel level. Essentially, you're blasting full color out from the video card, so you're going to get better tones and so forth. But many of us don't have those hardware calibrated displays, and we have displays that are similar to this, that are only software calibration capable. So what I'm going to do here is use i1Profiler to run a calibration on this display. Once it's done, i1Profiler is going to generate an ICC profile. That ICC profile is going to change the color output from my video card, and it's going to map it so that that color is close to reference as much as possible. So let's get started. The first thing I am going to do here is launch i1Profiler. Now, a couple of caveats here is that I am running this calibration on a Macintosh system, and for the most part, when you run this calibration either on a Mac or a PC, the whole process is very similar. Most of the settings that I'm going to show you here are the same. There are some settings that's going to be a little bit different on a Macintosh versus on a PC, and I will note that in this video when we get to those points. Now that I have i1Profiler launched, in user mode, the first thing I'm going to do is click on Advanced. With Advanced, the program is going to give us a lot of parameters that we can fine-tune for our display calibration, and that is exactly what we want to do here. Secondly, under licensing, make sure that you have the green check mark going on. If you don't, if it's showing the circle with the question mark like you see there, it means the device is not plugged in or is not being recognized. Specifically, what I want to clarify here is that for the colors perimeter device, such as the i1 Display Pro Plus or the i1 Display Pro next to it here, what you're going to see is these three boxes showing the green check mark. That is display calibration, display validation, and projector calibration. The other ones are going to show question mark because these devices are not capable of doing that. For these to show green, you are going to have to use the X-Rite Pro Color Spectrophotometer device. That is the i1 Pro 2, i1 Pro 3. Those are some of the devices that will enable all these other features, but that's not the focus of this video right now. Next, what I want to do though, and this is something to note if you don't see any green check mark at all under licensing, is to come down here under application setting and make sure that you have the proper device selected, the device that you're going to be using to calibrate your display. In this case, I have the i1 Display Pro Plus or the i1 Display Plus as it shows there in the program. I am set here, ready to move on forward. I'm going to move up here and click on under Display Profiling. This is going to show me a display setting screen, and this is where we can fine-tune our setting or start to fine-tune our setting. The first thing we're going to do here is making sure that the i1Profiler screen is popping up on the correct display. This is the case and scenario when you have multiple display hooked up to your system, because the screen that the i1Profiler is on is the screen that is actually doing the calibration. If you want to pop i1Profiler to the other screen, you can simply just click on the display that you want to calibrate. In this case, I already have this screen on the BenQ PD3220U. I am going to leave it here. Next up, right down below the display, you can choose the backlight technology. That's something great about this program. The thing is this, what I will do is leave the backlight technology at the default value what the program gives me, because the program already knows generally what the backlight technologies of your display is. If for some reason after you run a calibration and you feel that your result is not as good as you want to be, what you can always come here and do is change the display backlight setting. But for now, I'm going to leave this at default. Next up is white point. The default value here is CIE luminance of D65, and I would generally recommend that you keep your display white point at D65. And the reason why is because D65 is the most commonly used white point across all displays. Displays like you see here, hardware calibrated display, laptop display, iMac display, phone displays, tablet displays, most of them are calibrated from the factory at D65. So using D65 is going to give you the advantage where you're editing the colors that you're going to see closely what's going to render on the other devices. The other thing to note about D65 too, and the reason why we want to choose D65 is because at 6500 Kelvin, at this spectrum, our eyes see the most color. And when we're doing color editing, we definitely want to see the most color in this case. Next up is luminance. In this case, I have 100 candela selected. You can come here and change the display brightness. Specifically, if you're a photographer and you're doing any kind of printing work, the recommended range is to set it between 80 to 120 candela. The thing though to note is that if your display is older, setting it to the lower candela value such as 80 may not be the best idea because you're compressing the tones down so much. If you have a good display, or a newer display, in that case, 80 candela will do just fine. In this case, for this calibration, I am going to use 100. Now, something to keep in mind too is that this range of 80 to 120 candela will work well for those of you that are not doing printing, those of you that are uploading photographic work specifically for web consumption, for phone consumption, for tablet consumption. This range of brightness is going to work well for you too. Once you calibrate it, you may think that your screen looked dull, but essentially what you're really doing in this case is you're setting the standard brightness on your display, regardless of any other devices that are out there or any other display that are out there. And that's the way how you want to do calibrations. You want to be in control of the environment that you're doing the editing on. Lastly, what I want to mention here too is that this range between 80 to 120 candela is also a good brightness range to do video editing on as well, especially if you're doing editing in Rec 709 color space. Next up is gamma. In this case, I am going to leave gamma at 2.2, which is a great gamma for photography editing. However, if you're doing video editing and you want to use another gamma curve such as BT1886, you can come and check that here. In this case, I will leave this to standard. Contrast ratio, leave it at native because we don't want to go and control that too much. We want to let it fall where it may. I am not going to check flare correction in this case. I'm not really going to care about that at all. Let's scroll down here. Ambient light smart control. I am also going to uncheck that because I don't want my display to change color or change brightness as I'm going through my edits. I want my display to be set and fixed. Next, what I'm going to do is click on next. In this screen here under profile setting, if you're a Macintosh user, feel free to leave everything here at default and you're going to be fine. If you are a PC user, if you're using Windows 7, Windows 10, what I will recommend that you do is come and click on ccProfile version and change that to version 2. This way it won't conflict with the operating system and causes color to go strange or color not to render properly. This is the main difference between Mac and PC. Press next to go to our next screen. This screen is going to ask us how many patches do we want to measure in this case. You have the option of going between small, medium, and large. And I have done extensive testing on this. Between small, medium, and large, the differences between all of them is so minute. But because I'm going to do a calibration and I want this to be the best calibration possible, I am going to choose large. This way is going to measure over 400 patches, in this case 461 patches. From there, click on next. This is going to take us to the measurement screen. In this screen, we can click on start measurement right away, but before we do that, what I want to do here is go over a few more settings here. What I'm going to do is make sure that automatic display control is unchecked because what I want to do is go in and manually adjust my display brightness in this case. Secondly, I have checked adjust brightness, contrast, and RGB gain manually. So make sure that is checked so that you can go in and change the brightness appropriately. From here, if you scroll over, you can click on start measurement. Next, I'm at the screen where it's ready to start to do the measurement. Depending on the device that you have, what's showing on the screen may change, but in this case, because I'm using their colorimeter device, it's telling me to pick up the device, pull the cap out a little bit, swing this over so that the lens is exposed and it can do the measurement. Secondly, a screen will pop down there. What you see is that it's telling you to make sure that the device lay extremely flat on the screen so that there's no ambient light coming in to contaminate the calibration result. What I have found out, the best thing to do when you're running these kind of calibration is to tilt the display backwards like so. This way, when you hang the device and you adjust the weight, the counterweight on the display, the device will lay flat on the display surface. From here, click on OK. Now we are faced with the Profile My Display dialog. In this dialog, it will give you some instructions and options for you to check. By default, it has contrast and brightness check, which is exactly what I want. In this case, I am going to leave RGB control unchecked the way how it has right here. If your display has a mode where you can go in and adjust RGB gain control manually, you may want to try to calibrate in that mode too and see how that color is going to look. Specifically for this display, this PD3220U, BenQ have calibrated 2 factory color modes for greater uniformity. That means that the panel has been calibrated so that the evenness between the brightness throughout the panel is going to be fantastic. Those 2 color modes are Display P3 and sRGB. So for this one, I am going to calibrate this display using the Display P3 color mode so that I can get the greatest uniformity out of my calibration. This is something that I can't do if I'm in the RGB gain custom mode. So that's just something to keep in mind. So this is something that you might want to check with your display manufacturer before you run the calibration. But for the most part, pick a mode and you can just go in and calibrate. Click on Next. The display will run through its preliminary calibration. What this is going to do is flash some colors, and then afterwards it's going to give us a brightness value. Now that we are at this screen, this is telling me the brightness adjustment or the quality indicator. The quality indicator in this case is really just the brightness range. So right now, the target that I want is 100 candela, whereas measuring right now in the center of the screen is 111. It's about 10 candelas too high. So what I'm going to do in this case is adjust the brightness on this display, and we're going to bring that value as close as possible to the 100 value. So with my display right now, what I'm finding out is that I'm hovering between 99 and 101. I can never get to 100, but that's okay. As long as you're only a few points apart, your eyes are not going to be able to discern a difference. And even at this brightness, you're still going to get a good color and good calibration out of this. From here, click Next. At this point, the program is going to measure 461 patches. This is going to take some time. So when it's almost done, I'll come back to the camera and then we'll walk you through how you can save this profile. And then afterwards, let's talk about profile validation as well, because that is something that you definitely should do to see what the delta E value is. And I'm going to explain what delta E value is later in this video too. We are almost done with the calibration here. What you're seeing a moment ago is the calibration going by really quickly, and that's because I speed up the footage. A couple of things to note here. Once it's done calibrating or measuring the 461 patches, it's going to do a verification. This is the part where it's called iterative profiling, where it's verifying some of the patches again to make sure that the colors that it's measuring are correct and also that it can produce a better profile that way. We'll wait for this to finish. Now that this is finished, it's telling us to take the device that we have. In this case, because I have this one, I'm going to turn the cover, put it back on there, and from this screen, click Next. Because we're not doing any ambient light measurement here, it didn't go through any more further calibration, which is fine. From here, it's telling me that the measurement was successfully complete, and it's telling me to do something further. Acknowledge the dialog. Now what you want to do is click on the last color workflow or next, either one will do. In this window, you can come in and change the ICC profile name, or if you're in Windows, you will have an ICM profile. In this case, if you're running an experiment or a calibration test between the different color modes on your display, you may want to put in the color mode name in the file name so that you know which display or which profile belong to which respective color mode. The other thing that I would do too is make sure that you have a date in the profile name because you want to know when this profile was created, and those are always great information for you to have. Next up is profile distribution. I have user level check. What this really means for both Mac and PC is that if this is checked, it's going to put this ICC profile, or in the case of Windows, the ICM profile, at the root level. This means that any user who has a login to the computer will be able to use this ICC profile. So when they log in, they can choose this ICC profile as well. If you don't have that checked, it's only available to the current login user. Next up is profile reminder. Depending on what you like here in this case, you can set different intervals for reminder, 1, 2, 3, and 4 weeks. In this case, because I'm doing a demo, I'm going to leave it to none for now. Next, for ambient light monitoring, because I don't want anything to change, I am going to turn that off and leave that in off mode. From here, click on Save Profile. This is going to save this ICC profile for me. Once it's done saving, it says profile has been saved successfully. That's perfect. The next thing that you want to do is come towards the bottom here and click on Display QA. This is called Display Quality Assurance or Quality Check in this case. And the reason why you want to do that is to find the delta E value. So again, we're faced with this Display QA reference. Make sure that this i1Profiler is on the correct display. Next up, make sure that the backlight technology, in this case, if you left it at default, you don't have to worry about it. If you have changed it from the default value, make sure that you match it up to what you change it to. Next up, for patch set, I'm going to use standard. And in this case, I am going to use the industry standard test of the ColorChecker Passport, the X-Rite one. There's 24 colors it's going to measure, and it's going to go much faster. Next, click on measurement. And in this measurement screen, simply click Start Measurement at the top there. You're going to be faced with this screen again that tells you to set up your device. Again, pick up the device, rotate the cap, and hang it from the display. It's going to tell you to check to make sure that the device lay flush with the display. Acknowledge, press OK, and click on Next. What this is going to do right now is that it's going to measure the standard 24 ColorChecker Passport colors. And what's going to do is at the end, it's going to give you a delta E value, which is the value of the variation between the color that is measuring here versus what that color is supposed to be, or what we call the reference value. The lower the delta E value, the better your display. Generally, for a good color accurate display, you want the delta E value to be below 5. But if you want to have a really great and fantastic display for amazing color edit, you generally want that delta E value to be below 2. So now that this is done, take the device off the screen, cover it up. From here, click on Next. This is going to give you the report of this calibration. So the report is going to tell us a lot of things. It's going to tell us which color is off the most. For example, it's highlighting it there, which color is off, a little bit there. And the default here, the average delta E threshold right now is set to 50, which is extremely high. In this case, I'm going to set the average delta E to 2 and set the maximum delta E to 5. You can leave the delta E type at delta E 2000 because that's going to give us a good value readout. Now, let's take a look at our result. So far, it's still showing that this display has passed calibration or validation in this case, which is fantastic. So all of the patches, the average delta E for this display is 0.6. That's really amazing for any display that you're running a calibration on. And the average of all the patches, the maximum amount of all of them right now is at 1.3. This value is below 2, so what I'm getting from this display right now is an amazing color accuracy that I was not able to get before I've done the calibration. Next up, if you want to, you can click on Save Report. This will save it as a report that will go onto your desktop or wherever you tell it to save it. So in this case, I'm going to save this with the BenQ name. And it may be a good idea to save this because it's going to give you a report and it's going to tell you all these values in a tabulated data form. It's just going to be an HTML document, so you'll be opening it with your web browser. Last thing, what you can do here is you can click to add to trending. The nice part about adding things to trending is because i1Profiler allows you to come in here and add different trending points. In fact, what you're seeing right now is already done a calibration test, and this trending is showing the line really straight. You want that in your display. You want it to trend either straight or downwards. And that's going to tell you that you're getting a really great calibration. If your displays start to trend upwards, it's starting to tell you that your colors is starting to go off. If it keeps going upward and it keeps going above too, that may be an indicator that your display is approaching the end of life. So that's just something to keep in mind. From here, you can click home and close out i1Profiler. You are done with your profiling. A couple of things that I want to make a mention here briefly is that when you run a display calibration, make sure that you turn on and leave your display on for about 15 to 20 minutes before you run a calibration. This is for amazingly new and great display like this and old display as well. What this does is give the display an opportunity to warm up before you run any color critical calibration on it so that the color is the most stable at that point. A few more things to note. What you're seeing on the screen right now is the display verification report that we have saved out as an HTML file. Is actually telling us very similar to what the X-Rite screen report was showing us about the calibration, the delta E value, how it was measured and so forth. But the nice thing about it too is that rather than just hovering over each one of those colors, this one is giving you a table, a tabulated result of the variation between all those colors as you see here. I have Mac OS X Color Sync Utility launch, and what's great about Color Sync Utility is that it gives us a visual of what our ccProfile looks like, and we can do a visual comparison of the color gamut that we were able to calibrate. This is really fantastic. So what I want to do first is pull up Display P3 reference and show you what that color space looked like. This is the color wedge of Display P3. What I'm going to do here is hold that for comparison, and I am going to pull in the BenQ calibration that I've just done. So what is it telling me here? Well, the BenQ calibration in this case was able to produce more of the purple, magenta tones and so forth like you see there, but it's also showing less in the other areas. This is perfectly okay because this is showing a really good large color space. The other thing too that you want to keep in mind when you're looking at these color wedges is that you always want the edges and all the sides to be really smooth like you see here. If the edges start to look weird, like a crumbled paper, that means that your profile is not good or something is going on incorrectly with that profile. Next thing, what I like to do is hold this BenQ profile for comparison right now. And what I want to do is pull up Display P3. So you can see there that Display P3 is showing larger in most areas beside this outline wireframe that you see here. Next up, what I want to do is show you how this compares to Adobe RGB 1998. And we start to see the disparity right away. This is something that we have to note about software calibrated display, and that is the way how the panel is calibrated from the factory, whatever RGB primary that is, whether it's Display P3 or DCI P3, you cannot change the color gamut on the software calibrated display. What X-Rite i1Profiler program or any other software calibration program is doing in this case is that it's calibrating within the RGB primary of how the display was already calibrated from factory and bring that value close to it in reference value. There is no gamut translation whatsoever. That means that, for instance, this display was calibrated at DCI P3. There's no way to change this display so that the result or the color gamut here would match with Adobe RGB 1998. So I hope that you find this video on how to calibrate external display using software calibration helpful. If you have any questions about this, leave them in the comment section below. Give this video a like if you find it helpful. Subscribe to my channel if you're new. Hit on the notification bell so you'll be updated every time I load cool new guides like this. And until next time, ArtIsRight.